The purpose of this video is to walk you through the job application packet memorandum and to highlight some of the features of technical memos that you might want to be aware of. This again is to augment the reading that I've provided for the week, the textbook, and there's an additional reading in the additional resources folder from the Purdue OWL that also highlights memos. This job application packet memorandum is written to me. So while your documents are written for the employer that you're applying for, you want to consider how you're using this memo to explain to me your choices in terms of formatting, content, and any other choices you made in how you both created your resume and the content you included in your resume and cover letter. The first thing I want to highlight is formatting. So in document design, it talked about a lot of those design principles. Technical documents are single spaced. You begin here. A memo has all of this detail right here. So you have who it's for, who it's from, what the subject is, and you want to just pick a really particular, careful subject here. This is a fine one. You can also say something like cover letter and resume analysis. You can use any number of subjects here, and then the date that you wrote it. Because this is a more extended memo, you want to also use different features such as subheadings and paragraph breaks. So there are several different ways to approach this particular memo, but I obviously gave you sections that you need to include in the memo in the job application packet prompt, the description that I wrote of what I'm expecting in the assignment. So take a look at that and use that to break down your memo. For a longer memo, having a purpose statement, this paragraph that's right here, is really effective because it allows you to essentially highlight for the reader what you're doing in the memo. It increases their ability to scan. So you really want to consider including one of these in order to orient me, your reader, to what you're going to do and accomplish in the memo. This should be fairly brief. If it's a sentence, that's completely fine. And here the writer says, the following memo is an evaluation of a job application packet for the position that she applies for. And then she said, I have provided my analysis of the audience for the cover letter, and then also gone into greater detail on the rhetorical decisions made in the creation of these documents. You probably could do all this in one sentence or maybe even two sentences. Again, just give an overview, a highlight. Then she goes into the first section, which is the job description. She briefly describes what the position is that she's applying for. This needs to be in your own words, but it should be essentially a summary of the job ad that you're responding to. Give me the details so that I can understand the context of what you're working with when you wrote your resume and your cover letter. Don't belabor it. It's, again, a technical document. You want it to be pretty concise and to the point, but at the same time, give enough detail that I understand exactly what's going on. The next section is the audience analysis, and this is the most challenging section for a lot of people because essentially they start going into the analysis of their documents themselves. And here you want to think about the audience of who is reading your documents. Now, if you don't really know very much about the individual person that you're writing to, talk to me a little bit about the culture of the company. So for instance, here, this person talks about Boston Brands, and she says the organization is forward-thinking and creative-minded and emphasizes individuality and personality. And she knows that because she went to their website and she looked around, and she gets the sense from their website and their materials that they don't want to be seen as stodgy or traditional. They want to be seen as creative and fun. And so she says an example, if the company's professional but fun attitude can be seen on the Boston Brands website. On the page giving details about the executive team, you see formal photos of each person, but then when you hover over each image, it will change to a photo of that same person in a more whimsical pose, such as a person wearing a snorkel or a mask or a mascot head. That's, how she knows. So she's analyzing the audience here. And then she talks about the hiring process, that there's a team, and so on and so forth. So this is the kind of background research you have to do to understand a little bit more about who you're target audience is. And the reason I include the section on the memo is because I want to see that thinking that you've brought to the table. So consider the ways you can learn more about the audience, whether it's a particular reader or just the culture of the company that you're addressing. The next two sections are, or the next major section is your rhetorical analysis. So note here that she has these really nice subheaders, and then she puts another header underneath rhetorical analysis so that I know that she's analyzing her cover letter and then her resume. So here she, again, just briefly summarizes what her goal is to emphasize education and experience, and she focuses pretty heavily on the experience. So instead of don't just summarize what you did in your cover letter. Explain and demonstrate why it's effective. So here she says, since showing examples of work can prove to be persuasive, I decided to include an instance of my past client work. I selected a client who has a noteworthy success story to best showcase my abilities. My primary goal with including this piece is to show, instead of tell, my audience about the experience that qualifies me for the position. I feel like she could have gone into a tiny bit more detail here, but you can see here that she says, hey, I chose to include this example because it's one that highlights all of the things that I did well, and then I was showing, instead of telling, the thing that I've been telling you all, the experience and why she would be qualified. So she doesn't just summarize the things that she put on her resume, or in her cover letter, she actually analyzes why they're effective. And then finally she addresses this funny little part of her letter where she's been asked to do a talk about a potluck dish that she would bring and why she would do that. And she uses the space here in the memo to explain to me why she had to include that and why what she included was effective. And the same goes with her resume analysis. So she talks about organization primarily. So one element of effective technical communication is that important information is shared first. And that's her claim. The most powerful asset in my resume is my proficiency in the field of digital marketing. And then she goes into that, why she chooses to include her experience as her first section instead of her education. And then she gives her education because it's required for the position, but she really needs that experience to be highlighted more fully because it's more important to the viewer or the reader. And she talks about formatting next, why her formatting is useful. So she talks about consistency here. So you can use some of those terms that you've learned in the document design section of the class to analyze why your resume is formatted effectively. And then she talks about why she included the relevant technical proficiencies. This could be seen as a fluffy piece on some resumes, but for her it's really important that she includes. And then finally she concludes her memo. She talks about tailoring it and what she learned from the experience. I feel like she could have expanded a bit more on gaps or things that she maybe could have worked on to be more qualified for the position, but she's generally pretty qualified for this position. So, you know, there's a lot of different things you can do here in a conclusion. So the conclusion should be fleshed out a little bit more, talking about those gaps, what you could do to be more qualified or to be a more appealing candidate. So I just wanted to walk you through a memo in more detail and pay attention to not only the content here, but also the formatting. So thinking about including those headers, the appropriate sections, making it look like a memo to make sure that you're saying, hey, this is the genre memo. So good luck, and I look forward to working with you on these documents.